What is up, Inside Out? Hey, so good to see you guys tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Great crowd tonight. Who got the picture of me with the mustache? Of course he got it. All right, cool. Alvin, I'm so glad you were the one to take that home. I was surprised anybody else that happened. So sorry for that. $75 gift card, picture of me with a mustache. That's no comparison in my book. Hey, I'm so glad you're here tonight. This is your first time. Welcome to Inside Out. We think this is the best place you can hang out on a Sunday afternoon. If this is your first time back in a long time, welcome back. If you're here every week, good to see you as well. If we haven't met, my name's Heath, and I get to be a part of Inside Out here at Brownsbridge, and I'm so excited you guys are here as we kick off a new series to start a new month here as we have our first Sunday in August. We're kicking off a new series called Talk of the Town. And I started thinking about this idea of the talk of the town, and it comes with a lot of different messages around it, a lot of different connotations about what that even means when we say the talk of the town. I did some digging on the internet. I looked at Spotify. There's a lot of songs with that title. Jack Harlow basically says that he went from rags to riches, that I used to be a nobody in my small town, and now I'm a somebody. Need to Breathe says, hey, it's not worth faking it and pretending like you're somebody else in order to be famous, and become the talk of the town. There's nothing, it's empty, there's nothing in that. And then this may be a deeper cut for some of you guys, but maybe some of the leaders remember this band from the 80s called The Pretenders. They have a really great song called Talk of the Town, where they basically talk about a situation of a love that will never happen. Like, oh my gosh, if I could just get with this guy, we would be the talk of the town. Like some of you freshmen feel that. You went to high school this week and saw senior girls for the first time. You're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And you realize that you don't have a chance. But if you did, you'd be the talk of the town, right? And the whole idea is everybody's talking about this. I experienced it one time when I was in high school. This is 100% a true story. Most of the stories that are told on stage are true, but sometimes they're dressed up a little bit to make them sound better. But this is 1,000% true, not making up a detail on this. When I was in high school, I was the talk of my small town one time. And it was my junior year. Where's the juniors in the room? Junior year. Awesome. Shout out the juniors. Shout out juniors. Junior year, I played on the basketball team, and we went to the state tournament, and we were in the Sweet 16, and the game was tied at the buzzer, and I got the ball, and I was dribbling up court and pulled up right at the buzzer and shot it. And the shot went about 6 feet. And it was like a half-court shot. But it only went that far because some dude came and tried to block my shot and fouled me from behind like an idiot. And so in all seriousness, this happened, no time on the clock. They got everybody off the court except me and the referee, and I'm dribbling at the free throw line, okay? Tie ball game. I got 3 chances to make it. So of course, I'm very nervous. I'm very well aware there's a ton of people watching me. So I get up on the free throw line, I dribble a couple times, I shoot. And guys, you know what happens next. Brick. It was so bad. Not even close. My nerves were so tight. So then I get a second shot. And I'm like, okay, I have to make this one because I don't want to get to the third one because, then I would probably everyone see me shaking. So second time I get down there and I shoot again. No, I made it. Come on, guys. I made the second one. And so in all seriousness, I made it. We won the game. My teammates mob. Everybody goes crazy. Yeah, well, this was 100 years ago. It doesn't matter. But, so pop. I was on the newspaper. I was on the news that night, on TV, front page of the sports section of the newspaper the next day. Statewide. I had people all over the state. And oh, dude, you're on the front page of the news. It was the biggest game in the state. And in all seriousness, I got to experience the talk of the town. It was awesome. And then 2 days later, we lost in the Elite Eight, so it didn't matter. But the point is, it was one of those moments where I felt so awesome because all the attention, all the focus was on me and what I had achieved. But when I say this idea of talk of the town, some of you are like that, right? You want that moment to experience what you've worked so hard for. For me, I was oh my gosh, all those days in the gym, all that practice finally paid off. Everybody knows that I'm kind of okay at basketball, right? A whopping 10 points that night, right? And so it was one of those moments where I felt really good. And some of you were like, man, I would love that, right? You would love to be a little more visible for all the hard work you've put in. You would love a little more recognition for who you are and what you've done and all the sacrifices that you've made. And for some of us, when we talk about talk of the town, it's kind of man, I would love that. I would love to be a little more visible, everybody to know who I am and what I'm good at. Sometimes when I can't sleep at night, I turn on a movie or a TV show that I've seen 100 times. That way I can fall asleep at any point in time and not feel bad. Because if I put on something I've never seen before, I feel pressure to stay up and watch the whole thing. And so earlier this week, I turned on Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, because I've seen it a million times. And it's very early in the movie, if you guys are familiar with the movie, Elizabeth Swann falls into the water, and Jack Sparrow jumps in and saves her very early, like first 15 minutes of the movie. No spoilers here. The movie came out 20 years ago. But he jumps in and saves her, and all the fancy people, her dad's really important and famous. All these people come up and they realize that Jack Sparrow is a pirate, and they're like, we're gonna hang him, and we're gonna, they're getting mad. And then they start looking at all of his stuff, and they realize he doesn't have a boat, his gun's not loaded, his sword is just basically like a stick. And they're like, you're not much. The little guy goes, you're the worst pirate I've ever heard of. And Jack Sparrow goes, but you've heard of me, right? Like, it is one of those moments where he's like, finally, some recognition. Like, you guys know who I am. So I feel, even if it's like a bad thing, I feel good that you at least even have heard of me and know who I am. But for some of you, this idea of talk to the town, maybe you're like Jack Sparrow and you're just like, I just want people to know who I am. I want to be seen. I want to be more visible. I like the attention. Everybody look at me. But for some of you, this idea is like cringy, right? Like the idea of all the focus, all the attention being on you, especially if you've had one of those moments where you were the talk of the town in a bad way. Like you made a big mistake and everybody knows it. And you're walking down the hall at school and you can almost feel the eyes and the as you walk by, right? And this gut sinking feeling of everybody knows my business. Everybody knows my lowest point. Everybody's talking about me. And so regardless of which side of the fence you fall on, there's one commonality. There's one commonality, whether you're the talk of the town in a good way, maybe you made the shot to win the game, or maybe you're the talk of the town in a bad way, like you missed all three and your team lost in overtime. At some point in time, one thing I know to be true is this. Whether we want to be more visible or more invisible, it's easy for the focus to just be on us. It's easy for me to make the focus about me. And I think a lot of times when we talk about this idea of what our focus is and what we obsess over, all of us, naturally, it's not a bad thing, it's just a human thing. We look inwardly and we think about ourselves, right? Like we think about how the focus or the attention falls on me in my life. For some of you, you wish you had more. You wish more people paid attention to you and the things that you do. For some of you, you're like, I really wish my parents would get off my back and they wouldn't just like hover over me and be in every detail of my life, and I want some space. And some of you want to be more visible. Some of you want to be a little more invisible. But regardless, the focus is that it's all about us. So in this series, we're going to talk a little bit about the way that we're going to, as we often do here at Inside Out, this is your first time, we do this a lot. We look at things that we experience in life, and then we compare them to what Jesus looked like, his life looked like, and what he did, and how he basically navigated a lot of the same issues that we did. And so that's what this series is really going to all be about, is because if you know anything about Jesus and his story, Jesus really quickly becomes the talk of his town. But how he navigates it, how he uses it, is completely different than I think we do often. And tonight in particular, we're going to look at one character who had a very similar experience, became the talk of the town, and then all of a sudden had a very unique experience of sharing that talk of the town, that limelight, that spotlight with Jesus. And so if you're new to church and new to the whole Bible thing, the character we're going to look at tonight is found in the New Testament. The Bible's divided into two distinct parts. There's the Old Testament, which, judging by its name, is a little older. And then there's the New Testament, which, judging by its name, is a little newer. The Old Testament points to Jesus. The New Testament tells us about Jesus' life in the early church, following his life. And one of the stories of Jesus fall in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this is from the book of John. John is a guy who is a follower of Jesus, a close friend of Jesus, actually. But the guy we're talking about tonight is also named John, but he's a different John. So I had to get that out of the way. I'm talking about two different Johns. If you read about Jesus and his life, there's a lot of Johns, there's a lot of Marys. It gets really confusing. Okay, so to distinguish the two, I'm going to talk about John, the gospel writer, the writer John, versus John the Baptist. And that's the guy we're going to talk about tonight. John the Baptist was famous for baptizing people. It's right there in his name. He was famous for baptizing people. And for a lot of people back in that day, it wasn't like a weird thing. I know if you've never been in church a lot, but you've seen pictures or videos of people getting baptized, you're like, hey, I have a question, church people. Why are people getting, going swimming in the middle of church service, right? That looks really weird to me. Essentially, the idea, the practice of baptism comes from an ancient Jewish practice where, get this, the people would go to this like pool of water and they would get in, immerse themselves because they believed that it would cleanse themselves of all the bad in their life. Well, John the Baptist comes on the scene. If you know anything about John the Baptist, John was a unique guy. He had crazy hair and he wore weird clothes. He lived out in the wilderness and he ate bugs and he was just a strange guy, but he was really good at teaching and he was really powerful in the way he communicated. And so people flocked to him. They wanted to hear what he had to say. And he said, hey, no. We don't get into the water to purify ourselves. We get into the water to show people that God has purified us. And so he began baptizing people, getting them in and dunking them under the water in a similar way that they were used to, but in a way to saying, hey, this doesn't fix anything in your life. This is declaring that you're a changed person and the old you is gone and the new has come. And he becomes so famous and so popular that he becomes kind of the talk of the town. I mean, imagine this weird, eccentric guy with crazy hair and wears animal skins for clothes and, probably like, I don't know why, but like an unkept beard is how I picture him, like, with like stuff growing in it, probably. And he ate bugs, like on purpose. Like that's what he was like, hey, are you vegan? And he's like, no, I'm strictly bugs only. Like it's like a really weird, like locust and honey is what we're told he ate, which is not a dessert in the Miller household. And so I find him a strange character, but he plays this really cool and really unique role. In fact, the gospel writer John, introduces us to John the Baptist this way in his book. He says this, he himself, talking about John the Baptist, was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. He's like, hey, this guy got so popular. The people looked at him and were like, is this guy the Messiah? Is this guy the Christ? To put it in the terms of who we now know him to be. Is this guy Jesus? Like, is this the one we're supposed to be like waiting on? Because he's really popular, he's really dynamic, and everybody seems to be following what he has to say. Like, is this the guy? And the way that John, the writer, describes him, he's like, hey, he wasn't the light, but he was a witness to the light. They didn't have this concept back then, but if I would imagine if John, the gospel writer today, was here, he'd probably have compared him to like the moon and the sun. Right? You guys have passed like 5th grade science by now, so you know that the moon doesn't actually give off light. It just reflects light from the sun. And that's essentially what John the writer is saying here. He's like, hey, John the Baptist wasn't the sun, right? He wasn't the source of the light. He was just the guy that pointed to the guy. And so he kind of like, hey, he was a big deal, but he wasn't the big deal. But people were so skeptical and confused. This is how the leaders, the religious people of his day came to John the Baptist, and they talked to him about this. They were still confused about who he was and what his role was. Here's what they said a few verses later. The religious people came to him and said, all right, so then who are you? Are you Elijah? Are you a prophet of old come back to life to tell us about how we're supposed to live? He said, no, I'm not him. Oops, sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Thanks, Abby. Are you the prophet? He answered, no. Sorry, I messed up. Go ahead, next one. Finally, they said, well, then who are you? Like, if you're not a prophet, if you're not Elijah, who are you? Why are you such a big deal? Why does everybody want to come and hear what you have to say? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? And I think John the Baptist's response to them is fantastic. And I think it teaches us something about ourselves and what we're known for and what we make important in our lives. Here's what he says. John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet. So he quotes the Old Testament. And he says, I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness. It makes straight the way for the Lord. That might mean nothing to you, but to these religious leaders, he just quoted scripture back to them. He's like, hey, I'm not the guy. I'm a voice calling from the wilderness. Like, hey, clear the path, right? Like, pave the way for the Lord who is coming. And when he says, like, I'm the voice, he's like, hey, you guys remember, I don't know if it was like this for you guys in elementary school, but it was for me. If the teacher ever left the room, there was always that one kid, right? That one kid that was the designated lookout that was kind of like looking down the hall. And the class would kind of descend into chaos, right? There was usually like stuff flying around the room. That one kid was always out of his seat running around. And it just would become like kind of chaos. And then the lookout kid would be like, hey, woo-hoo, hey, teacher's coming. And everybody would scramble to get back to their desk and pretend like they were doing stuff, right? And I can remember one time the teacher came in and she's like, we all kind of hurried back to our seats and sat down really quick. And we were kind of breathing a little heavy because we had been, up doing third grader stuff. And we were kind of breathing heavy. And she's like, what's going on in here? Why are you guys all breathing heavy? One of the kids was like, I'm reading Holes, and they're digging a lot, so it's making me sweaty. And I was just like, if you guys read Holes, that's a funny joke. But if you haven't, you should read that book. But it was one of those things where he was like the lookout, right? Hey, I'm not the teacher coming, but I'm the one kind of giving you a heads up. It's time to get it together, right? Everybody get in places. The important person is coming. John's like, hey, that's me. I'm just the lookout. I'm the voice. I'm the guy sounding the alarm, giving the call, saying, it's not me, but somebody's coming who's important. And he quotes Isaiah and he says, make straight the way for the Lord. He's like, basically clear the path, pave the way. You guys have probably heard that expression before, pave the way. There are tons of people in this world who have paved the way for other people to go further and faster than they ever did. I think about, for instance, I'm kind of a nerd. I like to read and books and stuff. I've already quoted Holes in here, so you guys know where I'm at there. But as a kid, I loved like The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books and the movies that came out later. And I can remember as a kid, really dating myself here, as a kid, there was this new book series that came out. It was kind of similar, whereas this writer took and much like the Lord of the Rings, created this fantasy world where there's magic and there's dwarves and elves and stuff, and it was called Harry Potter. And some people thought it was like weird witchcraft and stuff, but I remember thinking like this is so cool, and it reminded me a lot of the Lord of the Rings books. And really, J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, really paved the way for J.K. Rowling to come around and like, oh, people really like it if you can teach them something about the world, about good and evil, by creating a fictional world that they can kind of like see the parallels to our lives in. And so very much the way that paved the way for Harry Potter. Or maybe put it this way, any One Direction fans in the room? All right, cool, yeah. I figured some of you guys, yeah, okay, some big fans over here. So a British pop band that came over and had worldwide success and fame isn't exactly new with those guys, right? Like, and then they all go off and have their own career. Like, that's not new. That's exactly what the Beatles did like 50 years ago, right? The Beatles came along, paved the way to be like, hey, you don't have to just be popular in your own country. You can be a worldwide success when it's music thing. And we can fly on airplanes now and travel around the world and do concerts, and people will love you and follow you, and it helps if you're really good looking. And so, it's one of those things where like, it's not really new. The Beatles paved the way so that bands could do the kind of worldwide fame and fortune thing today. Or here's one that's probably a little less known to you guys. There's a guy in the 1960s named Charles Sifford. Maybe you guys have never heard of Charles Sifford, but he's really important. He's really important to me because he paved the way for one of my idols growing up. See, Charles Sifford was the first ever black golfer on the PGA Tour. And he came and he paved the way and fought racism and fought prejudice and all that kind of stuff so that this guy could come along when I was a kid named Tiger Woods to become the best golfer of all time. And I think time and time again, we see the stories of people who paved the way for somebody else, but we forget about the person who kind of paved the way, cleared the path, and made straight the way for the next person. And that's essentially exactly what John the Baptist is doing. He's like, hey, I know all you guys think that I'm kind of the man and I'm doing all this stuff, but he's like, I'm just kind of paving the way, I'm clearing the path, making straight the way for the guy who's coming. And you're not gonna wanna miss this. And sure enough, Jesus steps onto the scene and he comes to John the Baptist and he actually gets baptized by John the Baptist. You might think that your faith is great, but have you ever baptized Jesus? Like that is a pretty big deal that John the Baptist got to do. He got to be the one who baptized Jesus. After that, Jesus began teaching. He began doing miracles, healing people, all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, Jesus becomes super famous. Like he goes next level, way bigger, way more important than John the Baptist. In fact, some of John the Baptist's followers, some of his disciples leave him to go with Jesus. Well, John the Baptist's loyal friends, his loyal followers are skeptical and they're like, what, this isn't right. Like, this guy's only famous because of John. Like, that's not fair. So they come to him. This is what they say to him. They tell him about it. They say, they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, it was teacher, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, Jesus is his name. You should learn it. But he goes, the one you testified about, look, he's now baptizing and everyone is going to him. Dude, he's stealing your whole thing. What are we gonna do about this? Like it was one of those moments where they're like, hey, like he's taking your whole thing and he's stealing your followers, basically. Like that's not cool. Imagine for a minute, I was like a famous like YouTuber or somebody famous on the internet. And I decided like, hey, like I'm gonna use my platform to highlight my friends, my students, and my student ministry. And I really enjoyed it. I don't know where you guys are in the room right now, but we're South Forsyth volleyball team. Are y'all in the room? Makes noise. Last year, they had a thing that I thought was hilarious that they would do all the time. And every day they would do, y'all remember the whip and Nene from like 2015? Ansley, I know. Ansley was like Ansley and Evie and all they would do the whip and they post it on social media. And I thought it was so funny. Every day at practice and games and stuff, they would do this whip. And they had this tagline that says, a whip a day takes the pain away. And so I just thought it was funny. So imagine I'm a famous YouTuber and I bring you guys up onto my YouTube channel and I'm like, guys, hilarious videos, like whatever. And then all of a sudden, everybody, like, they become famous. They become more popular. You know, they're the ones that are getting invited to like the MTV Movie Awards to host and stuff. And I'm like, well, hey, they're only famous because of me, right? Like, I'm the one who put them on my channel and made them famous. Like, it would be really easy for me to focus and make it about myself in this completely fictional scenario I just made up, right? It would be really easy. And honestly, if that's the way John would have responded, I think everybody would have been like, yeah, he's stealing your whole thing, John. But he responds so very differently to Jesus' rise to fame. So very differently. And I think if you don't catch anything else from today, listen to how John responds when they confront him on this. He says, talking about Jesus, must become greater, and I must become less. He's like, hey, I know you guys, I appreciate y'all having my back. I appreciate y'all like thinking that like he's coming to take my spot or whatever. But hey, it's really all about him and not me. Right? Like he said it earlier when he quoted the scripture to them. He says, cleared the path, made straight the way for the Lord. Like, this guy is so much bigger and so much greater than me. We all in our lives need to let Jesus become more important. Let our lives and our focus and our obsession not become ourselves and making ourselves famous and making ourselves known, but making him greater and ourselves a little bit less. He goes on to explain that point, and he says, the one who comes from above is above all, and the one who is from the earth belongs to the earth and speaks as one from the earth. The one who comes from heaven is above all. He's like, hey, I'm just a guy who eats bugs and lives in the wilderness. Like, I'm nobody. Like, he's like, what does it matter if people follow me or not? He's like, this guy is from heaven, God's son. Everything I do, I want to make him greater and not make it not about me. Now, as I read those words, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. First of all, that was his response, but also I'm super challenged because I think about my life and I think about the fake story I talked about with Ainsley and all. Like it would be so easy to be like, no, I'm the one who did all the work. I'm the one who grew myself. Like, you're just benefiting off the platform that I gave you. It would have been really easy for John the Baptist to have that take. But instead, with humility, with a bigger picture of God's plan for the world and for life, he's like, hey, at the end of the day, I'm just a guy from earth that people seem to listen to. But Jesus, he's gonna heal people, not just physically. He's gonna heal their hearts. He's gonna make their lives better. He's gonna give them an eternity with their heavenly Father. He's like, hey, we gotta make it more about him and less about us. In fact, today, I think that's kind of our point to the message today is this, that you'll experience more in your life when you become less. You will experience more in life when you become less. Like examples of that. If you serve others, you're going to experience more joy. I know some of you guys serve on Sunday mornings in Wambaland, in Upstreet, in Transit, and you get to experience the joy of watching kids and middle schoolers come to know Jesus, to grow in their faith because you get up early and come here in the morning. And you get to, when you serve others, you get to experience their joy and their energy and the little wins that they have in their lives as they come to faith. You get to experience that. If you forgive others, you'll experience more freedom. If you make it less about the hurt and pain that you carry around with you, if you make it less about they did me wrong, hey, if you be more willing to forgive, you're not going to carry as much baggage. And you'll be able to feel the freedom that God has when you forgive others. And if you begin to point people to Jesus, this is essentially John the Baptist's whole point. If you point people to Jesus, you'll experience more purpose in your life. He must become greater, and I must become less. When I was in working on my master's, I had a professor who taught a ministry class that I had back before I started working at Brownsbridge. I was in seminary and working on my master's degree, and I had a professor that every single day in class, in order to, he probably could have just lectured us on John the Baptist every day. That would have become really boring really fast. But he did this thing every class he started for a whole year. He started every class this way by reminding us this truth that if we point people to Jesus, we'll experience more purpose in life. He said, hey, you're going to be really tempted. You're going to be really tempted when people give you microphones. You're going to be really tempted when people give you positions of leadership. You're going to be really tempted when people tell you you're doing a great job. You're going to be really tempted to make this about you. This is how he started every class. He would make us do this with him every class. Some of you may have heard me do this before, but he started every class this way. He would make us repeat with him. We share the gospel. We tell people the good news about Jesus. We point to Jesus, make him greater, and God changes people. And he would start every class. He would say, remember class, we share the gospel, and everybody in the class would have to say, God changes people, right? Like, and then by the end of the year, we were like doing it with like a big like eye roll and kind of like, yeah, dude, we get it, okay? Every class for a year, you've started this way. But the point that he was driving home and the point that he would not let us forget is the role that we play. And I feel like John the Baptist understood this so well because John was like, hey, I'm not the big deal. Jesus is the big deal, right? I'm the opening act. He's the headliner. I'm the road sign. He's the attraction that you pull over to stop and see. He's like, I'm just the voice. Jesus, he's the talk of the town because he's the one who's coming to take away the sins of the world and to make everything right again. And I'm reminded by this sentence that my teacher made us say over and over and over and over and over and over again, that when it comes to reaching people, if we make it less about ourselves and more about Jesus, we're reminded that God is going to move in people's hearts and lives, and we just get to sit back and watch. And in John's life, he didn't exactly get to see it all. He was put to death before Jesus ever went to the cross and redeemed all of mankind. But Jesus, when talking about John the Baptist, said, there's never been a greater person who's ever lived, that's ever been born, I think is how he says it, than John the Baptist. And if you want somebody to think really highly of you, if Jesus says there's been no one ever born greater than he, it's really, really high praise. And I think because he fully embraced and fully accepted this idea that Jesus needs to become greater, I need to become less. So for you guys, what does that look like? What does that mean for you in your lives? Well, every single person in this room has a platform. Now, maybe not a famous YouTuber. Maybe you don't have viral videos of the whip, right? Like maybe you do, maybe you don't. But every single person in this room has a platform. The first thing I want you guys to do is identify your platform. Identify what it is in your life that helps you stand out from the crowd. For some of you guys, you're still figuring that out. You don't really exactly know what that is, and maybe you're just starting to kind of wrap your mind around what that is, and your platform feels about this big, right? Like not really a big difference from anybody else. Your platform might be your family, your closest friends. That's about it. Especially if you're just starting at a new school and meeting new friends and you haven't really made friends on your sports teams and you've only had 2 days of classes at this point in time. You're like, hey, my platform feels pretty small. I don't feel like I have that big of a difference to make. But some of you guys have been in high school for a while now and you've been able to make a name for yourself at your school and people know you. They know what you're for. They know what you do. They know how you live your life. They know how you spend your Sundays too. And they know that you're part of this place. And for some of you guys, you've had this platform that you've been building where you have influence with people. People look to you as somebody who sets trends, as somebody who, if they're doing it, it must be okay. And that you are beginning to build a platform for something. And what that is may still be up for grabs. Maybe it's something just to make yourself look good, promote yourself, put yourself up on a pedestal. Or maybe you can take the lesson that we learned from John the Baptist tonight and you can begin to prop up someone else. And for some of you in the room, you fully embraced the second point that I'm going to throw on the screen as I step up one more. The second point is that you use your platform to point people to Jesus. And for some of you guys in the room, you've been doing this a while. You've been following Jesus a while. You've been serving in your church a while. Where are my seniors at? Seniors, make some noise really quick. Oh, perfect. There's a lot of you right in front of me. I can see you really well right now because I'm kind of out of lights. But for some of you guys, this is kind of like your last hurrah. Like, whatever difference you're going to make, whatever impact you're going to make at your schools and on your sports teams and in your places of employment and in your neighborhoods and in your friend groups, like last shot just started on Thursday. And so for some of you guys, you have the platform. The question is, how are you going to use it? People look to you, you have a reputation, people think you're whatever you are. How are you using your platform to be like John and say, hey, I'm going to make it less about me. And if people look to me, I'm going to point them to Jesus. I think for each and every person in this room, how that looks is different. In a minute, I'm going to dismiss you and you're going to go to a small group and you can discuss that with your small group leaders and what that looks like and kind of figure out how you can find your platform, how you can use it to point people to Jesus. But for everybody in the room, I've got a really, really easy one for you. Next week is the biggest Sunday that we do at Brownsbridge Inside Out. It's our back to school bash. Lauren talked about it earlier. It's going to be a ton of fun. And it's the easiest invite you're going to ever have for that friend that you know who doesn't go to church anywhere, for that friend you know that is maybe going through a really tough time and they need some positive influences in their life, or for that person in their life that just doesn't really have like a direction or they're really kind of just aimlessly wandering through life and they don't know what they're looking for. It's a really great opportunity that every single person in this room has this week to say, hey, no strings attached. My church is having a really fun night next week. It's rock and roll themed. We're going to dress up. We're going to act crazy. We're going to have a great time. Afterwards, rock and roll. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I'm too far into it now. We're going to have like a rock wall. We're going to have a roller skating rink. Like, we're going to do cool stuff. If you don't even get down with the Jesus stuff, you can come and have a good time. So every single person in this room has the easiest invite that you're ever going to have to church for next Sunday. So my question for you is, how are you going to use your platform to point people to Jesus this week? I'll let you guys figure that out in group, but first, bow your heads and pray with me. Heavenly Father, next Sunday is going to be a blast. We're going to have so much fun. Everybody is going to be there. And Lord, I pray that for all these students gathered in the room tonight, Lord, that they begin to think about the lesson we learned from John the Baptist tonight. John was a big deal. People knew his name. He was popular. He was famous. He was kind of eccentric and weird, but hey, people seemed to like him. Sounds like a lot of these kids. God, I pray that this week they begin to see their friends, they begin to see their neighbors, their classmates, their teammates, that person at school that nobody seems to talk to or that doesn't really have any friends. And God, that they would begin to see people around them this week like you see those same people. And they would use their platform, they would use their influence, they would use their connections here to bring people next week, to help them just like, hey, church can be a place where you can be known, you can be loved, and you can hopefully experience a faith and have friends that point them to Jesus. So God, this week, as we try to figure out what exactly the purpose you have for each and every one of us this year, what purpose you have for these high school students this year in their schools and their communities, God, I pray that you would just open their eyes, open their hearts to the people who need to be here the most. And God, give them courage, give them bravery to reach out, make an invitation, and make everything they do about you. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen. Amen.